Alright, so it's been a long time since I did a walk around video of any of my builds. This is a new build that took me, I've now pretty much 2 years out from the beginning of it. It started life as a bunch of different vehicles that I have kind of grafted together into this big crazy thing that you see before you. I call it the TOTERHOE. Eventually it's going to have a camper on the back, removable. Some people might have heard of toter homes, where you got those big semis with a motor home on the back, but then also a spot behind that to haul a trailer, like a gooseneck trailer or something. And so this is going to be pretty close to that. So a huge chunk of it came from a Ford LN 8000. The Ford LN 8000 was generally low miles, but was a Midwest truck that was pretty rusted up as far as the cab goes. But the body, but the frame, the engine, motor, engine, transmission, whatnot was all good. And so it's the same engine, transmission, and rear end from that. It came with an 8.3 Cummins that's P-pumped, so mechanically injected 8.3. It was from 1997, so one of the last years that they did the P-pump. And the transmission is a Allison MT643 automatic 4-speed transmission with a lockup converter. It actually is pretty nice, I will admit. I was a little hesitant about it being an automatic transmission, but then at the same time I wanted it to drive like a bus or a motorhome, something that my wife could drive if she wanted without freaking out. My other semi, which is an International 7100, has a manual 6-speed, and my wife never would touch that thing. So another vehicle that I grafted with this was a parted out propane truck, the Chevy C7500. So it had a big old long frame on it. So I used that as kind of the core for the frame, stretched it a little bit, used parts from the Ford LN 8000 and that. And now that I've walked around, someone might have noticed that this actually is a cab from a Tahoe, a GMT 400 Tahoe from the late 90s. Technically, it's a 1996 Tahoe. So it has the better interior, the better sealed up cab, more comfortable seats, things like that. So it basically is a marry between a Tahoe, a Ford LN 8000, and a Chevy C7500. That's what the front clip came from, is the 7500. A lot of the cab parts came from the 7500. Motor, transmission from the Ford. But the rest of it was all grafted together by me. So the cab mounts are made by me. Well, they weren't made. I used them from the frames and readjusted them. You can see that blue piece down in there. That's for the front one. I've got 6 mounts. Down in here is another one using the original frame mounts. So there's 2 more, and then there's 2 in the rear, which are right there, if you can see that. So since the Ford 8000 was so rusted out, so were the air tanks. So I essentially had to redesign the entire air system. I bought 2 separate air tanks, utilized a lot of similar lines, but had to remake them. And so I have 2, I think they're 15-gallon tanks. I can't remember, but they might be 15, they might be 20. But all the air is running off of that with the same original pump and air system. So I had to redo that. A lot of the air system actually comes out on a mount that I did underneath the center console right there, which I'll show you the center console. That was quite a bit of work. The center console is essentially 100% homemade, but with reusing the same parts. So I'll show you the engine. Nothing special, it's just your standard 8.3 Cummins. It's grafted in there pretty tight. I was able to reuse all of the original Ford LN8000 radiator. So there's the intercooler, the radiator. Use all the original brackets. I did have to remount this radiator excess tank, overflow, whatever. I did have to kind of just redo and do an intake system off of that since that was different. You can tell I actually was able to splice it without having to cut up the tranny tunnel, and I'll tell you, it is very close. It is literally like half an inch away from the motor in a few spots, but very close. Go on to the other side. I'll show you that there's the P pump. I removed the automatic solenoid and turned it to a standard cable pull to do the fuel shutoff. So now this thing officially is an all mechanical diesel. It gets very close to the cab, but is about a half an inch away everywhere. So some things I had to solve with the new cab was one, the electrical system. I had to remove the fuse relay box and really gut the entire wiring harness down to its bare bones, so that the cab, the electrical from the cab, and I know that this isn't cleaned up. I still have to do some zip tying and some taping and some lumen and whatnot, but the cab actually is on its own power from the battery, so the cab works off of the key from the ignition to get all the lighting and the interior and the windows and everything to work. And really I just sent power from the battery to that fuse box. This fuse box right here used to be sitting on the fender well right here, you know, about right here in the Tahoe, so that had to be relocated. A lot of this other junk is stuff that doesn't matter anymore. This was the analog brake system, or some of it is analog brakes, and this stuff right here is the airbags, which obviously no longer are functional. I did have to, I reused the Chevy C7500's steering column. I spliced it onto this thing and kind of had to weld in a custom mount. I had to cut a custom hole in there, which I have covered up with some flexible rubber, which is on kind of flapped on both sides, which seals it up decent, not amazing. Admittedly, that's a downside. I did have to also fabricate in this Ford LN8000 brake pedal for the air brakes, and I'll show you on the inside exactly how I did that. Basically had to cut a hole in the firewall there, mount that thing in there, and then build my own pedal out of the original Tahoe pedal. To the average person, the steering column and the pedals look just like a stock Chevy. So it's just like a stock Chevy interior. However, the angle of the steering column is slightly different, so much so that I was not able to fit back the plastic on here. So that's probably the one thing that is a little stripped on the interior. As far as the pedal goes, you'll see how the steering column comes down. I had to move the steering column down to make that angle less steep and to work around the pedal. The pedal is a normal brake pedal, but been welded up and modified with a bracket by myself to work with the air brakes. But it works. Still uses the stock throttle cable. So the throttle cable, I just ended up using the Tahoe throttle cable, which comes down to here on the pump, right there, and I just had to weld a little bracket right there. This is the kickdown cable for the transmission, which creates, obviously the spring's built in right here for the throttle. The kickdown cable is a little stiff, so it does make the pedal stiffer. I have an extra throttle cable just chilling around in case I ever have problems with that. It's not that stiff, and frankly, it's probably about the same as any Chevy TBI or 700R4 where they have a kickdown cable that makes that cable stiff. Pretty similar. Figure I'll probably have to change out a throttle cable every 50,000 miles or something if I ever even go that far with this thing. Other than that, you got a little shot of the interior. So you can tell that it is a Tahoe cab right there. I plan on making some handles here to come down and cover that up a little bit. But it's when I bought it, this was a $400 busted up Tahoe that had a blown motor in it, so I got it for cheap. I spent a lot of work into cleaning it up the best I can. There's my homemade 3.5-inch exhaust fix for the world's worst cup holders. But I had another wrecked Tahoe that I stole some parts from, so you might notice that's kind of a tan door panel and the rest of this is gray. So it's a mixture of tan and gray, but so long as it's functional, that's no big deal to me. One thing you'll notice is that back seat obviously is not stock. No Tahoes ever came with a third row seat. This one is a fold-out seats from the back of a 2000s Tahoe, 50-50 split seats. I basically just screwed in some seat brackets into the floor there, through the floor, have put some big old nasty washers and some grade 8 bolts down. And now this thing seats 8, which is important for me because I have 6 children. Whole point of this is that my other semi was fantastic at hauling 2 rigs to go wheeling with a bunch of people, but my family would have to always go separate in a, like another truck or a Suburban or something. So this is my center console that I built for this thing. It's a little mix of ghetto booty fab plus James Bond. I don't know, it's kind of interesting. So I was actually able to get all of these gauges to work. So straight up, just the coolant temp sensor, put it into the block, just like in a Chevy, and it works. Obviously, putting power from the battery to the cab makes the alternator gauge work. The gas gauge, it's actually the tank out of the Ford LN8000, and so Chevy versus Ford have different resistance patterns with the gauge pickup. So actually a quarter, when it reads a quarter, that's full, and when it reads well past full, that's empty. I might put some stickers there to make it obvious to somebody else, but I know. Also, the fuel pressure gauge just bolted right into just screwed right into the exact same spot on this Cummins, and the Chevy one worked for it. So those 4 gauges work. These 2, however, do not, since they're not mated up to it. However, I do have these. This is the tech from the original Ford LN8000, the one that works with the Cummins. It was a little faded, but I can see it, so it works. Kind of a hodgepodge of stuff, but they all work. This is a GPS gauge, or a GPS speedo. Tells you your speed no matter what, which is good because sometimes I put big military tires on this thing and it screws up the normal speedos. Boost, EGTs, and air pressure. Some of these are just bought off the internet. This one's from the original truck. These 2 are. So the gauges are half down there, and they work. This is the original shifter from the Ford that works with the Allison. I fabricated it in here to make it work. This is interesting. This actually controls the air-operated transfer case, which I'll show in a second. And then, you got the air operation there, and then this is actually my PTO style cable that does not control my PTO. My PTO is controlled up here by that switch, but this actually is my fuel cutoff. And then, so this right here is my starter, and it only goes to starter. So you basically have 2 keys, one to start it. So you start it, turn it, pull the key out, take the different key, the ignition key, put it in, turn it on, and that controls the body. And so now all the body is on. Put it in the standard aftermarket deck. HVAC all still works, minus the AC. I could put the air conditioning parts back on the motor if I wanted, but honestly, I'm probably not going to because I ain't no punk biatch. Some little bolt-on thing for some cup holders. So those cup holders plus those that are in there on the back seat make it so that it is decent enough. I'm thinking about putting some more cup holders in the back just for convenience. The thing about this interior is it was really hash job. I actually replaced the carpet, so this is fresh carpet, if I can get that to work. That's some fresh carpet down there, some fresh mats. Seat's a little faded, and supposedly this seat's got 350,000 miles on it, so honestly, it's incredible shape for what it is. That's why I like those so much. All right, so here's a gas tank. Probably could use a paint job to match the rest of this stuff, but dual 75s on each side is what I've estimated these things to be, so 150 gallons. This thing gets empty like 11, maybe close to 12 if you're coasting. And so, you know, you're talking well over 1,000 miles of distance, even while towing. Stole some parts from the the C7500 as far as steps and battery boxes and stuff. The batteries are actually on the other side in a similar box to that. So the flatbed is made by me. It's a 16-foot flat deck made out of all 2x4 120 wall. It's braced up pretty good all throughout. It's mounted with 9/16 bolts. I think there's like 10 of them holding it down. This headache rack is incorporated into the flatbed. And just to ensure that this thing didn't sag or break, because I know that all that weight would be on that one joint right there, I did put in this support bar right there, but did not weld it to the frame so that the frame can kind of flex underneath it. So far it's been working great. I've been kind of keeping a close eye on it, and I haven't seen any stress fatigue or anything like that. So the rear end actually has air suspension, which is really nice, super nice compared to my sleeve sprung other truck. And then this is the cool part. This is gonna end up being a 4-wheel drive. It doesn't have a front axle in it just yet, but that is an Allison T600 transfer case mounted up in there. It's actually air operated, and you can tell that it's got sensors on it. And air lines going to the switches to control it. So it gives you high, low, and then a lockup. When it's not locked up, it's in, it kind of has a planetary setup so that it's like a part-time. So I pretty much, when I don't have the front drive shaft or front axle in there, I have to run it locked up to actually get it to work. So you gotta have air to actually run that thing. But the switches in there are pretty sweet. It's a kit made by Western Canadian Rockwell. But anywho, here's another angle of the flatbed and my ramps. I may end up changing the kind of ramp setup, but so far the strap has been working. You basically slide them back, flip them over, and then run them on my rail here with some drip holes in it. And I've been able to put a 7,000-pound truck driving up the ramps, no problem. Overall, the thing's 32 feet long. It has good lighting and reflective tape and whatnot. These are actually blinkers. These ones are marker lights. So it's got blinkers all the way down. And then the Tahoe cab didn't come with cab lights, and can't have a big medium duty without cab lights, so I did have those. Added the towing mirrors. These are pushed in, which actually is pretty good, just like that. But if you had a full camper in there, you could slide them out another 3 or 4 inches. As far as getting these kick panels on here and to get it to work with the cab, I did have to cut out the corners of the cab on the C7500 and kind of splice them onto this Tahoe cab. You can't really see it, it's up in here, but that created the mounts for those screws to actually mount this thing in there, so that I can actually get the kick panels to mate up with the thing, to mate up with the front clip. Also, these just screw on there. I mean, you kind of have to have the dash taken apart, but these just screw on there for this support. And then this one up here just screwed on there as well. Just took them off of the C7500 cab and mounted them on here. Other than that, the cabs really are the same thing. The only difference are these 2 parts and then the corner shape down here. Other than that, it is the same. So Built the bumper. I thought it looked pretty cool. Has some lights and whatnot. I got some more plans for this thing, but it hauls real good. I might crank up the pump a little bit and make sure that I can get a little more juice out of this thing. It's actually a kind of a low horsepower version of the 8.3, but since it's just a P pump, I should be able to crank it up and watch EGTs, and if EGTs get too high, I might have to swap the turbo out. But so far, I actually drove over a really nasty pass with one of those 7,000 pound trucks back there on the back, and stayed cool, drove nice, the lockup was great, brakes were awesome. So far it's been a great rig.